to help protect yourself in cases of uncertainty. So when you don't know what to do, you pull one of these out of the toolbox. All of these are things that you've probably done at some point, and some of them we've talked about before, so those will just be review, and other ones, it will just be learning a term to associate with an action that you're already familiar with. So the first one that we're going to look at is denial. This one is very basic, the most basic of all of the defense mechanisms. With denial, you're just basically refusing to believe that whatever you heard exists, or whatever happened at all. So protecting oneself from an unpleasant reality by refusing to perceive it. This is very common in cases of death of a loved one, where you hear that your grandmother died and you just keep on moving on like nothing ever happened. Or maybe you failed the test and you just pretend like that never happened. You don't think about it and it didn't happen at all. There's kind of a fine line between denial and repression, which is our next defense mechanism. Repression is one that we've talked about before. And this is where you're unconsciously preventing painful or dangerous thoughts from entering awareness. With repression, your mind is making a decision for you that says, I cannot remember this. Repression oftentimes gets used as an example in cases of child abuse or things like that, where it's just too painful for you to remember. Trauma during childhood, where you are just forgetting it. It's not that you deny that it happens, although sometimes you might as well. But with this, it's painful, it's dangerous, you can't even pull it out of your awareness, it's underneath the surface of your consciousness, and it's just too painful for you to actually pull out, so you're not aware that it exists at all. Another defense mechanism that you probably have used before or seen before is displacement. If any of you work retail, I can almost guarantee that you have been the unfortunate recipient of displacement, which is where you substitute a different target for impulses when the original would be dangerous or unacceptable. So here's a scenario. You have someone that is at work and maybe they've gotten bad news from their boss. Maybe they're overworked. Maybe it's just not the place that they want to be. They're not fulfilled in their job. And then they go visit you at your store. Maybe you work at the apple orchard. Maybe you work at a grocery store. Maybe you work at a retail clothing store. And you're just the humble cashier or putting away things or just working on the floor. And they come to you and they just chew you out. They have displaced their anger. They've substituted you as the target of their aggression instead of their boss or their spouse or whoever they're actually mad at. They can't actually duke it out with that person in the way they want to. So they chew out somebody else instead. This might also be the case, like with the picture on the left-hand side, where you're angry with something at school and you take it out on your little sibling. Poor kid there. That's another example of displacement, where you're substituting the target and putting it onto someone that's more vulnerable instead of the actual person that's causing you grief. Another defense mechanism is projection. This one happens all the time, but it's more subtle. So a projection screen takes something, an image, and puts it onto something else. So in the classroom, we have the projection screen that puts it onto the smart board. With projection as a defense mechanism, you have your own personal feelings, and these could be positive feelings, they could be interpretations of events, they could also be shortcomings or unacceptable urges or impulses, and you put those thoughts and images and whatever it might be on somebody else, and you think that they actually think that. So let's look at this example of this Valentine. So let's say that you have some feelings that have developed for somebody else. And you think about them all the time. This is like major 5th grade type crush. And all of a sudden, it's Valentine's Day, and they give Valentines to everybody. Everyone has their little Valentine's box. They're putting in all the Valentines, and you get your Valentine from that person, and you like cherish it, and you say, I know they picked up those words because they truly, truly love me. This is a match made in heaven. This is going to work. Now, your feeling is that you have this major crush on them, but you're attributing their actions as them having a major crush back on you, even though it might not actually happen. This doesn't just happen in this sort of scenario. Maybe let's say that you're really disappointed in your own performance on a certain sports team, and then you start talking about other people and you say, oh man, they're just so mad that the defense didn't come through, when really that's what you're mad about. So when you take your own feelings and you say that other people have them, that is projection. Another one that's a little bit tricky to understand is something called reaction formation. This is where you, as you see here, prevents dangerous impulses from being expressed in behavior by exaggerating opposite behavior. Essentially, you almost try to deny your actual feelings by acting out in the opposite fashion. So in this little cartoon here at the bottom, it says, "Hey, Miranda, are we still on for tonight?" Miranda here says, "I'm totally sorry. I forgot. I already made other plans." And our original person here is really upset. She's thinking that she's mad, but instead of saying that she's mad, she acts out in the opposite fashion, reaction formation. She says, "I'm not mad. I'm fine. I'm happy. I didn't want to hang out anyway. I'm busy," whatever it might be. You act out in the opposite way than what you're actually feeling. This happens quite a bit. Going back to our example of 5th grade style crush, think about boys and girls on the playground and how childhood crushes come out. This is a perfect example of reaction formation, where if two people like each other, sometimes the way that you can tell if they like each other is if they're like punching each other. So like if that boy punched you on the playground, that might mean that he actually likes you. You're acting out in the opposite fashion than how you actually feel because you don't know how to deal with the actual feelings. Or if you're really upset with your mom and then you say like, "Man, I just really love you a lot." And you really try to focus on that. Maybe you're even trying to convince yourself. You're acting out in the opposite fashion than how you actually feel. Reaction formation. The next defense mechanism here is regression. And I've seen this sometimes, and I hear about it happening even more than that. So regression is whenever you get into a situation, maybe you don't know how to deal with it, but instead of acting and dealing with it as your actual age that you are, you retreat to an earlier level of development or to maybe an easier form of yourself. So the example I always think about with this is, imagine that you just got into a big fight with your parents, and right now you're 16, 17, 18, you're trying to demand respect as an adult, but yet I've heard of lots of cases, and I've seen some cases, where you get in a fight with your parents, and instead of talking it through, like the young adults they know you are, people literally stomp off like a little child. I can imagine times, or I can remember times with my little sister where she would be in high school, and she would run upstairs and slam her door. And that is a major form of regression. Or maybe it's when you go visit friends from childhood and all of a sudden you act like you're 10 again. These are both forms of regression. You don't know how to deal with that group of friends as 17-year-olds. So instead you go back and you act like you did when you were 8 or when you were 6. Another defense mechanism is rationalization. Rationalization is when you justify your behavior by giving reasonable and rational, but false reasons for the reasons that you're giving. Essentially, you're explaining away your behavior. Teachers see this all the time with paper due dates. It just happens. The day of the paper, everything breaks. It wasn't broken before, but all of a sudden now the printer's broken, the computer crashed, whatever it might be. Now, all those might be totally legitimate. They might be true. They might be reasonable. But that's not really why you can't have your assignment today. That's just the excuse that you're giving yourself. You're talking away the problem. The reason that you don't have it done is because you didn't prepare until the day before it was due, and then there was something that came up on top of it. But when you rationalize it, you're saying that the whole reason you didn't get it done is because the printer broke or the dog ate it or whatever your excuse might be. The next defense mechanism is sublimation. Sometimes we encounter things that really frustrate us really badly. It might be a fight with a friend. It might be being cut from a team. It might be a breakup with a significant other or some family problems. And sometimes it's just not appropriate to deal with it head on, or at least you don't think that it is. Maybe it's not appropriate to displace that either and take it out on a little sibling or, an employee on a store. If you use sublimation, you actually work off these unmet desires or unacceptable impulses, etc., in activities that are constructive. The perfect example of this is someone gets really angry and then they go running for like 5 miles. They're like, "I just need to go deal with this." And they just go take off. And they work off all their angers. Instead of dealing head on head with whoever they're upset with or whatever the problem is, they decide to run instead. It's something different. Or maybe you write like angsty lyrics for a song that you want to sing. That would be another way of dealing with it in a different way. So you're not dealing with it head on and you're not taking it out on somebody else, but you're channeling your energy into something maybe more productive than a fight. The last one that I want to talk about is compensation. Compensation happens all the time. This is where you feel like you have some sort of weakness. It might be real, it might be imagined, and instead you focus on something else, or maybe you even focus on that particular thing even more because you feel deficient in that particular area. So let's say that you don't feel like you're a very good student. You know that school is not where you excel. Some people might take that feeling of inferiority and channel it, compensate it into really trying to excel in sports. Some psychologists are going to say you do that so people don't notice that you're weak at school. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you're really bad at sports, so you say, I'm going to try really hard at school. On the other hand, one example here, especially with this little girl putting on lipstick, sometimes people just don't feel that attractive, and then instead of trying to go a different route, maybe they overcompensate with wearing way too much makeup, where you're like, you'd be really attractive just without makeup, but they feel inferior in that sort of aspect, so then they wear a lot more makeup to try to make up for that fact. So these are all different types of compensation, but you're trying to make up or counteract weaknesses that you may or may not have, but you feel like you do. Compensation. So in all, we've talked about several different defense mechanisms: denial, repression, displacement, projection, reaction formation, regression, rationalization, sublimation, and compensation. For tomorrow's quiz,